this presentation, we'll be exploring educational services that are offered to inmates in the U.S. Correctional facilities. And we'll be talking about a variety of things over the next hour or so. But we'll start with some introductions, as I mentioned, and we'll jump into a true or false activity. And I put this activity in the poll questions. So if you responded to those already, that's awesome. And if you didn't have a chance to, I'll show them on this presentation as well. So after we do the little introduction, we will go into the background, literature on incarceration, and then the different types of programs that are offered, and specifically look at educational services and the impact of those services. And then we'll spend a chunk of time talking about this data set that is the census of state and federal prisons. And we'll dive through that and look at the different service availability across a variety of factors. And then at the end of the presentations, we will wrap things up and go over the true-false activity all together. And there'll be a chance for us to discuss a little bit more back and forth near the end. But please do chime in, react to anything in the chat. I have it open and I will be looking at it throughout. So if any questions do pop up, you can type them in and I will try to address them as we see them. Okay. I'll also be pausing in between each section too, to provide a chance for questions. All right. So starting off with some introductions, in the chat, if you could share just a little information, whatever you're comfortable with, but your name, maybe where you work, your location, state would be helpful, and then your role in adult education, as well as your experience with correctional ed specifically. And while I give you all some time to type that out, I'll share some about me. So my name is Christy Gerard. I'm in Georgia, have been my whole life. I've actually only been kind of school is my life. I graduated from a Georgia high school, enrolled in Mercer University, where I got my bachelor's in chemistry and psychology, then jumped into Augusta University's Master in Psychology program, where I started to dip my toes into educational psychology research. And then I am now at Georgia State University studying for my educational psychology PhD. And I work with Dr. Daphne Greenberg at the Adult Literacy Research Center. And my research interest is really around how what we do as researchers and like the findings that we have and all of that are integrated into practice. And that has led me into so many different projects, which is a wonderful thing. But in the last year or so, I've been diving more into correctional education and really trying to explore how these evidence-based practices are used or maybe not employed in every case. And then just a little personal tidbit. My sister is she's incarcerated and has been since 2020, and I have been raising her kiddos for the last couple of years. And I've been watching her go through the system of trying to find, she gets moved from place to place throughout the justice system. You start kind of in a jail, local facility, and then depending on where your cases are, you have to be transported. So she had some struggles, and really just the availability of services at each place is so different. And that as a researcher, my eyes lit up. And so I started diving into all this data. So that's enough about me. I'm gonna kind of look through some of these comments here and see who all we have with us. So we've got Mary, who is an academic teacher in Florida at a correctional institution. She's been working there or working in correctional education for 6 years. We've got Danyana, and forgive me if I butcher any names, I'm so sorry. You're teaching soft skill classes at a technical college in Wisconsin with incarcerated cohort students. Awesome. Casey in New York. Wonderful. Michael from Kentucky. Awesome. Daphne, hey. No experience with correctional education. Oh, very cool. Um, we should talk about that. And then Annie, New Mexico. Wonderful. We have such a wide variety of people. Um, People with different experiences. Awesome. Since 1991. Wonderful, guys. Okay. So I'm so grateful that you all have joined us, and please utilize that chat. We can go back and forth, chime in as you see fit. And we will go ahead and jump into this true or false activity. So as I mentioned, the poll questions are on Whova, and I'm going to show them again here. And if you haven't had the chance to respond to these, if you could just note true or false for each of them. And at the end of the presentation and the discussion, we'll revisit these specifically, but we'll kind of be talking about these points throughout. Um, so this is a good place to start. So first, every prison offers educational services. Second, anyone who is incarcerated can participate in educational programs. Third, people who are incarcerated do not want to participate in educational programs. And with that, we will jump into the literature. So the US population is less than 5% of the world's population, yet the US incarcerated population is more than 20% of the world's incarcerated population. And when we look at the prevalence of this statistic and how it's impacting family members in the US, the work from Inns et al. In 2019 tells us that 45% of Americans reported having ever had an immediate family member incarcerated. And they dug into this statistic a little bit more and found that this percentage varied by racial group and by education level. And so for individuals who are Black, 62% of these people identified ever having had an immediate family member incarcerated, and we can compare that to how individuals who identified as white reported 42% of them having ever had an immediate family member incarcerated. So we do see a difference in the groups that this is impacting. And likewise, when we look at education level, 60% of people who had less than a high school degree reported ever having had an immediate family member incarcerated, while 30% of college degree individual reported having ever had an immediate family member incarcerated. And when we extend the statistic beyond immediate family members, so not just siblings and parents, it's 64% of Americans have ever had a family member incarcerated. And one of the factors that we kind of need to talk about when we talk about incarceration is incarceration rates. And it can be a tricky statistic. So the Bureau of Justice definition for this is the number of prisoners sentenced to more than 1 year under state or federal jurisdiction for 100,000 residents. And that language is particular, and it's notably different from other sources like the PPI, the Prison Policy Initiative, which is where this graphic is from, which they try to produce more of the whole pie, as they call it, to really figure out how many people are detained in the US. And so that's where these statistics are coming from here. And we can see as it flips through each of the states' incarceration rates that some states have very, very high rates of incarceration. And the US is already 6 times that of the UK, 12 times that of Norway. It's a problem. And when we look at Georgia, especially, which is where I'm from, we see an example of a very high incarceration rate. And this is actually typical of states in what's called the Deep South, which consists of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. And the problem of incarceration is this very complex issue with lots of different things at play. And one of the things is prison costs. So the US is spending roughly $182 billion to house the nearly 2 million individuals that are detained annually. And likewise, there are costs associated with being incarcerated. And while some people might have paid positions while they're incarcerated, such as a work or job assignment, they're being paid low wages, if they're even being paid at all, few cents to a dollar per hour, possibly. And I've heard during some other presentations that there are instances of other types of job assignments as well. But regardless, it's not common for that to occur. And there's other costs associated with buying socks and t-shirts and hygiene products from the commissary or store, and having to pay for phone call fees or potentially legal fees, family fees, any other kinds of financial responsibilities. They don't really go away while you're incarcerated, that stuff. And being incarcerated, not having the opportunity to make money and contribute to that is a stuck situation. So when it's time for people to be released, they can be at times worse off than they were before they were incarcerated due to social stigma and the weight of their environment. And when we look at the rate of recidivism, which is reoffending after being released, it's relatively high. And so this is from a 10-year study from people released in 2008 until 2018. It's one of the Bureau of Justice Statistics reports. And when you look at all of the people who were released, 82% of them reoffended within 10 years. But then the majority of those people reoffended within 3 years. And over half of the people who reoffended did so within 1 year. And unemployment after incarceration is prevalent. And we can link these things together and see that, without having a job, without having stable income financially, and knowing that people have financial motivations for committing crimes, and all of this is linked together in this cycle, these statistics paint this picture that we really need to be providing effective reintegration programs and services for people who are being released. And so these services and programs come in different shapes and forms. And I've used the Bureau of Justice Statistics organization of work assignments, counseling or special services, and education programs to kind of frame this outlook of services. So starting with work assignments, people could have facility support type of work assignments where they may be doing office or administrative work, food service work, doing building maintenance or janitorial custodial types of duties. They could be doing public work assignments that involve inmates working outside of the facility to perform like road work or park or other types of public maintenance work. They could be doing prison industry work, working on license plates, wood products, textiles, depending on the contract type of thing. And then there's also agricultural work assignments, which includes things like farming. There are counseling or special services that, well, counseling is one of those where they offer like 5 different types, and I've lumped them all into counseling just to save space on my slides, but it includes drug dependency counseling, alcohol dependency counseling, psychological, psychiatric, HIV/AIDS, sex offender counseling, and they also offer programs such as anger management, employment skills, which is specific like job seeking and interviewing skills, programs that are focused on life skills and community adjustment, such as managing personal finance and conflict resolution, parenting skills, and then apparently canine training is prevalent enough that it was an option on the census, and victim services. So they offer a wide variety of these programs and services that aren't formal education programs, but would potentially be useful for students in this rehabilitation process or journey for them. But what we're going to be focusing on here are these formal education programs. And so these include the lower adult basic education category, where people are reading at or below a 4th grade level and trying to improve their literacy and numeracy skills, and upper adult basic education, where it is 5th to 8th grade reading levels, GED or secondary education, people working towards high school diplomas and everything, or equivalency degrees, English as second or other language programs, special education programs that work with inmates that have learning disabilities, vocational programs, college programs, and study release programs. And so these are the options. There's an option for other, but we'll get into the statistics, and it's not common for people to report that. Um, but the impact of these programs is pronounced and substantial. So this Bozek et al. From 2018 is a meta-analysis. So they gathered all the research and put it together, and education programs participating in them is linked to lower recidivism rates and an increase in post-release opportunities. They did find that participating in college programs is particularly beneficial, especially in comparison to other programs and kind of like the return on investment side of it. And a handful of other studies have found the positive impact as well with regard to providing college programs to inmates. As for the history of higher education in prison, it's been a bit rocky, I guess is the best way to put it. So, starting out in 1962 with the first prisons offering college classes to inmates, and then jumping into 1994, there was the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act that restricted inmates from accessing federal funds for education while being incarcerated. And it didn't completely shut down all of the college programs, but it did, we saw a dramatic decrease in the number of places that were offering programs because people weren't able to afford it anymore. But there was hope. In 2015, we saw the Second Chance Pell Grant get approved, and so there was a 3-year initiative to pilot this from 2016 to 2019. And this is actually where the census is from. So this census is a snapshot of the July 30th, 2019 prison status. And that's kind of where we'll end our background literature review, and we'll dive into the census next. I do have the chat open still. I don't see any questions, but if you have questions, bring them on. Okay. So I'll go ahead and keep moving, but if you want to react to anything as we move through, feel free. So the Census of State and Federal Adult Correctional Facilities is a publicly available data set. You can access it on the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, or just with this DOI link, and you can download the free version. And so notably, the free version was published in 2022, so it took some time for them to collect that data and then publish it. Now, this is a series of census that repeats every 5 to 7 years. So they are actually collecting data, I believe, for the 2024 year, and so I won't be able to see that for another few years, it looks like, but that's what they're working on. And they have this data tracing back several decades. So it is a census, and it has national prison representation. It's not a sample necessarily. It is, all of the population of U.S. prisons that fit this description are represented in this data set. And as I mentioned, it's that snapshot of mid 2019, and that's kind of perfect in a way because the Pell Grant pilot initiative ended in 2019, that 3-year program, and schools and community colleges and prisons had a chance to continue that, but it was a whole nother application process and all of that. So this kind of gives us that look at how that initiative helped potentially, and kind of where we're at now. But importantly, this census is all correctional facilities, so that does include confinement and community-based. So confinement facilities are separate or separate in concept from community-based facilities in that they are confining people. Um, so there were two copies of the census that were distributed. They were very similar in items, but there were some more specific language for people who are community-based in parole and probation, in which 50% or more of the residents are regularly permitted to leave unaccompanied. And then confinement facilities has that opposite defining line where less than 50% of the inmates left the facility unaccompanied on a regular basis. And notably, the term confinement does refer to prisons, prison farms, penitentiaries, correctional centers, work camps, and reformatories. Um, but I commonly use the word prisons just to refer to this whole group of confinement facilities. And so as we see from the statistic here, the confinement is 1,161 facilities. So that's 69% of the overall sample. But this is our new grand total. And so you'll see that number pop up on our other frequency tables down the road. So when we're talking about this survey and this census and who it went to, one of the important things is to dissect in terms of who it didn't go to as well. So the survey only reflects facilities that were operated by State Department of Corrections, DOC, or the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the BOP, or private facilities that are under contract to house people for the DOC or BOP. It does not include anybody under the Department of Homeland Security's jurisdiction or the Bureau of Indian Affairs jurisdiction. The Department of Defense is not included either, and juvenile facilities and jails are also not represented here. And so as we that defining line between jail and prison is mainly about how much time people are going to be spending there or anticipated to be spending there. So jails usually house people who are awaiting a sentence and people who are serving less than 1 year, while prisons house people that have been sentenced to more than 1 year. So from this census, I've pulled out some variables for us to dive into and to kind of see the way that they are impacting the services that are offered. So the first thing is the facility function. So this is going to be the primary function that applies for most of the inmates. And then the security level, which has to do with like the physical security, surveillance and exit ways. The operation authority, the gender that the facility is authorized to house, the number of inmates, and that is the term that the census uses, which is why I keep repeating it, but I'm trying to fix my language and switch it into justice impacted or incarcerated individuals. And we also have the state that the prison is located in as a variable, and the educational programs that are offered as services to inmates. So I've put the exact survey items so that you can see the options that people chose from, and you can see the way that the data is organized pretty cleanly here. So this first set is how we got the facility function. So they were asked, what are the functions of the facility? Then they were asked to select the one that applies to the largest number of inmates. And then from that, we get our frequencies. So we can track our total number here. So we have everyone represented, 1,161 prisons. And we see that most of these are general population with fewer percentages for drug or alcohol treatment confinement, as well as psychiatric and medical facilities. And we will dive into these a bit more, as I mentioned, with educational stats. So for security level, and you can see from this descriptive that they provided a definition for each security level when they filled it in. And I found this to be interesting because they did describe like actual fences and people patrolling and all of that. But it was helpful to see the way that it was classified. So administrative and medical facilities are grouped together with super maximum and maximum facilities because of that more strict security. And then medium is medium, minimum is minimum. But the published version of the census does take the other category, so anybody who checked off other and specified, and they've tried to fit them into the appropriate category. There were a handful of people who didn't indicate a security level for their facility, and it was deemed not applicable. And we'll look at those people too. So for the operation authority, this one's nice and straightforward. State authorities are typically lumped in with federal authorities to have that overall um, public authority category versus private. But for the sake of clarity, I tried to split that apart. But then since local authorities are kind of still operating under the jurisdiction of state, parameters, I did keep those together here so that the state category includes local authorities and the joint and state and local authority prisons. We can see that most of these are state. For gender, this is pretty straightforward. We did have one facility report unknown for the gender that they were authorized to house, so they just didn't respond. That happens in this kind of stuff. It's more prevalent than I expected it to be in a census. And it will create some problems down the road just for not having a complete data set. But we deal with missings all the time in the real world and we'll manage. For number of inmates, they asked them to report the total number at the facility and to include everybody that are temporarily absent. And one of the things that I appreciated as a researcher is they had people report the statistic multiple times in these like summative ways, and then they cross-checked the totals. So I am pulling the total number of inmates for prisons, and you can see that it's a bit of a messy variable because one prison does house just one person, according to their report. Now, when we look at states, there's a interesting distribution of the number of prisons across US states. So Florida, for example, has 121. Texas has 112, and partially this is population based and every state kind of has a different population parameter. But it was very interesting to see. And we'll look at this graphically, which is a little easier to digest in just a minute. So for educational services offered, these are the categories as I'd mentioned. And this breakdown is as shown here. So lower and upper and secondary programs are offered 80% and above, which is great. But special education programs are only offered in 54% of the places, and English is a second language, only 38%. Vocational, 72, college, 49, and the list goes on. And this none category, I think, is very interesting. So these are places that checked off that they offer none of these formal education programs. And there are 58 prisons that do not offer any. And a key thing here is 30 prisons didn't answer the educational service item. So we don't have data on them except for their other responses that preceded the item. So I would blame attrition, but I'm not in the minds of I think it's RTI International that was commissioned to conduct this survey. And according to their procedures, they followed up and did as much sleuthing as they could to get the answers in a complete data set. But we still have 30 prisons that are missing responses for education service items. So in this breakdown, we can see that most of these prisons are housing general adult population confinement people, that most of them are low security and most of them are private facilities. that house men. And from the inmate count, we can see that this set of 30 prisons ranges from housing 183 people to 1,750 people. All right. So now we're going to break down these results and look at these frequencies in a few different ways. And if anyone has any questions about variables, feel free to write it in the chat. And I'm going to keep moving for now, but I have my eyes on our chat as needed. Okay. And so when we're looking at the distribution of educational services across these states, I figured that the best way to show this would be to show each of the program offerings individually. So we'll start here with the lower adult basic education programs by state, and they're alphabetically sorted according to the abbreviation. And we can see, Arkansas in 2019, according to this report, had 0 lower adult basic education programs. States like Florida had about a little over 50% of a rate, and other states had more 100%, or closer to 100% for offering lower adult basic education programs. When we shift into the upper adult basic education programs, it looks very similar to the lower ABE, but we do see that there is some differences, and some states not offering that for as many prisons. And then when we shift into the secondary and GED programs, we see this spike. It went, all of the blue bars got a little higher, the darker blue. Which I found that interesting, because if you have a population of people that might need that lower ABE and the upper ABE, but then they might be housed in a facility that only has secondary GED programs, it doesn't really make sense to me, because we do need to be addressing and filling all these gaps to help the population. Speaking of which, special education programs by state. This was overall, I wrote it down. Overall special education programs was 54% of the prison sample. And it's bleak, in my opinion. I feel like we need a lot better coverage and representation, but I'm sure, yeah, so reading a comment. Yes, but I'm sure that a lot of this has to do with availability and funding and staffing, and just not really having the means to provide. And so kind of one of the big pieces here is advocating for getting that more attention, more advocacy, more funding, more people involved, so that we can try to address some of these gaps here. When we shift into the English as a second language programs by state graph, it's this one was 38%. Yeah, I don't love that. It's not great, and it's highly variable by state, with some states offering almost near 100% of their prisons are offering this service, and others much on the lower end there. Shifting into vocational programs, which are pretty common at 72% of prisons offering them across the board. We do still see some state-by-state variability, though. So rarely, California has a 100% mark, but it is rare for states to do that. Kansas as well. College is overall 49% across, so half of these prisons aren't, and it's widely variable. California, New York, they seem to be doing relatively well as Ohio, in terms of trying to provide for all of the prisons in the state this college service. And other states have other struggles or other things going on or other barriers, but it is, regardless, the variation is there. So for study release programs, Texas is doing phenomenal in that regard. So shout out Texas for that. These programs are really interesting, but they're also extremely rare in terms of like the overall picture. There's only 108 prisons in all of the 1,161 in the US that are offering that. And then again, looking at the um, number of prisons that do not offer any education programs by state. Florida. They just, I mean, there's so many prisons there. I imagine that that plays into it. The theories, the research on it is scarce though, so I'm interested to dive into all of it. All right, and now looking at the inmate count by state. So box plots, they look at continuous distributions. So in that main rectangle, that's 50% of the data. And then the top tail and bottom tail look at the upper 25% and lower 25%, with the red dots being outliers, which for anybody who's quantitative, outliers are stressful. Uh, um, and this data set is full of them as we see, and we'll see more later too. But this variability really does shift, and so it's showing that overall inmate count for the prisons. So we can see that distribution, and the higher up on the y-axis, the more people are being housed in one facility. And I think it's interesting because it varies in a way by state's population, but not exclusively. And so, kind of some key points here is that there is this variation in the number of prisons and the services that are offered, and the number of people that are housed at a single facility when we look at states. And overall, it appears that the chances of being at a prison that offers the program that you need or want is going to be dependent on, at the very least, the state that you're in. And as we'll see in upcoming slides, there's other factors as well. So I'm going to go ahead and keep talking through these results, but if anyone wants to chime in about if they were surprised or, do some reactions in the chat, that would be okay with me. So now looking at frequencies by education program and prison characteristics. We'll be organizing these according to those 5 variables that I laid out, and we'll start with facility function. So for the prisons that function for the purpose of housing the general population of confined individuals, which is 85% of the prisons, this is that pattern of whether or not whether or not this education service is offered. And we see high marks, at that lower to secondary, and then that drop off with special education and ESOL, another relatively majority for vocational, and then that half and lower for the college and study release, as well as other. And then when we look at these individual different types of facility functions, and we can see how that pattern does change for some certain cases. So the category of youthful offenders, which is only 6, and mind you, this data set is for facilities that are primarily to house adults. So youthful offenders is more that younger category. I'm thinking transitioning from juvenile facilities into long-term adult facilities, and then boot camp as well, but they have this higher 100% for the lower, upper, and secondary categories there. And for medical facilities, it's quite prevalent, but it isn't fully prevalent. And if anyone ever needed to take time to shift out of a place, or if they were being housed in a psychiatric type of facility, they would still potentially need access to these services if they were wanting to. So operation authority is that state, federal, and private branch. And we see a bit cleaner of a pattern here because all of the federal programs are offering lower adult basic education up to college. And I do say up to, kind of on a continuum here, but I mean just in order of these categories. The variation between state facilities and private facilities is a bit different though. So obviously from this graphic, we can see that being housed in a federal facility means you'd have more opportunities. There'd be at least a program available in theory for you to sign up for. But the state facilities, it's much more sporadic across the spectrum, as well as for private facilities. Security level, I found this fascinating. I really anticipated there to be less access for people who were in maximum or high security facilities, but that wasn't necessarily the case. The lower, upper, and secondary ABEs percentages were higher in some cases, most cases, than the medium and lower. And then for college and study release, we do see it might be a bit on that lower side. But it's very interesting to just dive through in these different ways that prisons, that certain people who are in a medium facility are disadvantaged in ways compared to people in a maximum facility. Okay. And now looking at gender. So most of these facilities do house males. Most of the prisoners in the US are males. And the pattern of distribution, so when I talk about a pattern of distribution, I'm looking at these like blue numbers across the strip and then comparing them to the blue numbers across the female strip and seeing how those percentages differ in the same education service column. And it's quite similar except for college. And we see that for females that 58.9% of the female-only facilities are offering college to their incarcerated individuals, but only 48.8% of male-only colleges are offering that to their incarcerated individuals. So for inmate count, here, oh, I see a comment. We struggle with our max security area with services offered, but have found virtual access on their tablets has helped. Yes, I was listening to a wonderful presentation that talked about technology integration in and then like the extra measures that they were taking to ensure that the devices were secure enough for the administration to approve of using that. I think that's an excellent avenue for expanding access. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay. Inmate count. So this graphic to me is one of the more clear ones. So keeping in mind box plots and those red dots are all outliers statistically. Fun. But the blue box is higher. So it's facilities that house a higher number of inmates are more likely, according to this visual, um, than inmates or than prisons that house a fewer number of inmates to offer education services. And we see that that blue box is higher than the red box in each of these columns, except for maybe other and none, because that's that reverse of the facilities that don't offer any. And in a way, this makes sense because they want to make sure that the access is for the greatest number of people in a way. But there are several people, several thousands of people being left out of these programs. So to kind of tie things together in a summary, there's the pattern of authority where federal facilities around the board 100% offer lower ABE, upper ABE, secondary and GED programs, special education, ESOL, vocational and college, yet the state and private operated facilities are much more varied. And as we saw with that state graphic, it's varied from state to state and across these factors. So facility function as well as security level, they had a pretty consistent mapping across each of the characteristics categorically. But when we do look at some of those more specific cases, like I pointed out with boot camps and the youthful offenders and how the general population has a larger percentage of offering that lower, upper, and secondary category, we see similar patterns in security level a bit with how college and study release varied. a bit between these categories, but overall it looks more consistent across the different categorical layers. Now, for gender, there is just a large number of male-only facilities, so in a way it's necessary to account for that. And there's a pattern that seems to be mirrored from males to females and the facilities that house both males and females. But in that college category, we saw a 10% difference. So when we get into the nitty-gritty of each of these services, there might be other factors at play. All right, and then inmate count does appear to have a clean connection to this, that facilities that house more inmates appear more likely to offer any educational service. Facilities that house fewer inmates appear more likely to offer none. So kind of a key thing here is that there are hundreds of prisons that do not offer lower adult basic, upper, secondary, this whole category. And we can see from the inmate counts that I manually summed for each of these categories how many people that is impacting. And I even included that group of 30 prisons that didn't respond to the education service item because there are 29,729 people incarcerated there. And we don't know if they have education services available or not. And so I think it's really important here for us to be well, paying attention and trying to advocate for and increase the awareness of the need to spread this wonderful thing that we're doing, educating the incarcerated population and trying to help increase the opportunities that they have post-release. But there's a population here that we are missing that don't have access. And that brings us to our discussion portion here. So I'm going to tie this back to the literature just a bit, and then I'll present some questions for you all at the end of this, as well as present an opportunity for you to ask me any. So for the prisoner profile, kind of relying on the PIAC data here, the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, 2014-2016, they assessed the general population of U.S. adults as well as the general population of incarcerated adults. And so from that data, we can see that incarcerated adults had lower literacy and numeracy scores than the non-incarcerated population. And in terms of GED or high school diploma or equivalency, only 30% of this population of incarcerated people lacked a GED or high school diploma. And 58% of the incarcerated population reported not completing further formal education after being incarcerated. And of those who did report participating in formal education, most of them stopped at a GED or a high school diploma. And with the stats we just looked at, we can kind of connect that to availability of services, potentially. That's definitely part of it. And our learners here, they're not lacking a motivation, but they're lacking access and potentially awareness of the need to get these certificates and kind of build their tool belt so that they can kind of hit the ground running at the end. So 21% of the sample were pursuing a degree or a certificate, and then 70% reported that they wanted to enroll in an educational class or program. But a quarter of those were on a wait list. That's super disappointing. And I know it's the service availability, staffing problems, and all of this, but there's a need. There's people who are losing motivation when they're just sitting and waiting and not seeing that they have a chance to participate. So in terms of the types of degrees and classes that people were wanting to join, it ranged. 29% wanted to pursue a college certificate or a trade school certificate. And another group, 18%, wanted to pursue GED or high school diploma, and then an equal amount, 18% wanted to pursue associate's degrees. 14% bachelor's degree, 13% with that pre-associate's education, so acknowledging college preparatory need and wanting to participate in that. And then 8% wanted graduate or professional degrees. So that motivation is there, and people are wanting to enroll to increase their knowledge and skills in subjects that are interesting to them. That's 41% of the time that people report that that's the reason they want to enroll. And then the other reason, so they're tying it to that's an intrinsic motivation factor, which we love to see as educators and researchers studying education. And they're also tying it to the increased chance of jobs post-release and increased chances of jobs while incarcerated, so job assignments, that's 39% and 8%. So tying that to that extrinsic value system in a way that's healthy, they're seeing the connections and the values. And then other reasons as well. So certificates, family reasons, and then 1% said that it's required. But I mean, okay. And then for the main reasons that people did not want to enroll, that's kind of where we get more information into the mindset of why people might feel amotivated. And they report that their reason, 20% of this population reported that it's not useful or it's poor quality, the services at their program, or that they themselves were not qualified for the program. And that's 10%. Another 9% reported that they wanted to keep their position that they held already in the facility. And I've heard that as well from some other presentations throughout this conference. And then 8% said that the classes that they wanted, which were higher level, just weren't available. And then 3% said the wait list is too long. Another 51% had indicated the other option from this multiple choice list and described a variety of issues ranging from trying to prepare for their upcoming release, already being involved in other types of classes and services, wanting time to work on legal documents or write letters to home or, even do just other things. And some people were just not interested. And I would argue that possibly these people who aren't interested haven't ever been shown the connections and the opportunities that are available to them if they, have that GED under their belt and have that check off the box, to move forward. And developing literacy skills is so essential for functioning in everyday life. We see that time and time again. All right. So, our true false answers, as you might have noticed by now, they're all false. It's kind of a sad and bleak presentation compared to the other more hopeful and uplifting presentations that I've seen. But unfortunately, this is the reality that every prison does not offer educational services. We saw percentages across the board for each of those categories. And anyone who is incarcerated can participate in educational programs. No, that's not true either, because we saw from the PIAC data that people are, um, on wait lists, not able to participate. The classes that they want to take aren't offered. They're not qualified. Maybe they're at a location where they're trying to get their GED, but maybe they need to take special education classes and work their way up through lower and upper ABEs. But can they do that if the class is there or the class isn't there? No, they can't. And then lastly, people are motivated to participate in these programs. We just need to be doing our best to make sure it gets there. So this work comes with a handful of limitations. And for me, the most important one is that this project mainly focuses on this educational component. And we know that rehabilitation and reducing recidivism, increasing post-release opportunities, that it's a full picture type of thing. And so we need to be providing that personal side, social supports, and helping them with that transition into a vocational stable position, hopefully. But with the work that I'm doing, I'm limited to the census variables. And so I've kind of narrowed my way into this educational service category. And then I am only able to frame or to connect the prison data to other prisons within or to other variables within that data set. And then there's so many outliers in my sample, and I do use the term sample because I have lots of missings, as you saw as well, which gives me a little bit of problems as this is a preliminary and exploratory study as of right now, but I do plan on building a model that tests this relationship between prison factors and whether educational services are offered. And that's going to be my dissertation up and coming. So I am gonna pick your brain a bit and use the experts in the field to see if there's any other factors that I might be missing. Um, yes, and to Chris, I believe my contact information is on my Hoover profile. Um, it should be. It's also just you could email me at christy.gerard, my name at gmail.com. Yeah, so if anyone wants to volunteer some other prison factors that possibly could be contributing to whether educational services are offered, just listening to other presentations, I've written one down about incident reports involving officers, and somebody had mentioned a link between fewer incidences when there's educational services that are offered. So maybe that's something that would help explain variability in these factors. Possibly demographic variables. I've looked at that. We looked at how incarceration can be differentially impacted. Um, Racial distributions of the prisons. Okay. Well, if anyone does want to chime in the chat, feel free. And I'm looking at the Zoom chat and I haven't been on the Hoover one. I don't see any in the Hoover one. Okay. Well, so because I saw so much state variability here and I've taken some hierarchical linear modeling classes now, I plan on accounting for state variability in this model. And by grouping these prisons as the first level of the model to the states as the second level, I now get to add some state level variables here. So as I had mentioned earlier on, region is one of those variables that might be kind of at play here. We talked about Deep South and the statistics there. And state policies is another area that I'm trying to look into a bit more. As I mentioned, my background is mainly STEM and psych. So policies is not really my forte, but I am trying to be as holistic as possible with my view on this topic. So I've looked at the what do you call that? The states that have strict policies for incarcerated students accessing funds from the state. And that seems to be helpful. But yeah, if you guys have more, that would be great. Hi. Sure. Sure, Mana. I have the PDF is attached to the Hoover app. But if you put your email in, I can send it to you. Yeah, there has to be buy-in from the upper level. We have support from our upper management. Yeah. And as a newbie, I guess, I have a hard time identifying like who the upper levels are in each of these cases. From other presentations, it was I heard people talking about um the administrative like warden type of that one prison, I believe. Um, but it's hard to get at that in this kind of model, but really just spreading awareness is one of the main things that I feel that we need to be doing and engaging in. I know one issue that I notice is the shortage of correction instructors. Yes, I've heard this I toured a facility a while back and was heartbroken to see wonderful and equipped classrooms that were empty. I asked why they were empty, and the answer that I received was that, for example, a carpenter instructor could make six figures working on the street in construction and about 30,000 in the classroom. I think that's so unfortunate. It is. It's extremely unfortunate. I, hmm, our teachers are not paid near what they should be paid, I believe. I don't, um, I know that some other countries have like kind of a different kind of system where teachers are paid a bit better and supported a bit better, but I know within yeah, and within corrections, I imagine the paycheck is different, which I haven't ever looked at that if the paycheck is different between like general adult education and correctional education. Interesting. Um, I do know, so just so we know, this is my last slide. My next one is just questions. And then I have resources and an appendix. There's so much in there, but I have the PDF version attached to Hoover for you to download. And if you want to look through it, it has the state-by-state stats for each of the educational programs. Thought that might be helpful. And I'm going to go ahead and write this email down before I forget so that I can make sure I get it sent to Mona. Mona. Okay. I'm talking about at the state level. We just got pay raises, so it has made a difference in staffing. Yes. Pay raises. Yes. Ooh. I could do average state salaries. State salary, AE teacher average. Wonderful presentation. Thank you all. Thank you all. I love this topic. I think it's so interesting. I'm just super, super passionate about, well, really justice and access to education for everybody. So I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. And I'm happy to just sit here and keep chatting. But I know this is one of the last sessions, I think, and I'm virtual, so I'm home. So if anybody wants to keep chatting with me, that's completely fine with me. I'll probably have to close out at 5:10 though, but yeah, I'm glad. I'm gonna hop back here. Yeah. So, and the pay being part of it. So the racial distribution of categories is something that another facility had done. Another facility, another dissertation that I'd read in the past that looked at data from 2000. And they did some other factors too. But that's one of the things that I'm considering here. Do I have anything on jails? I don't. Yeah, so it's a whole different data set file, but it is freely available on ICPSR, the Census of Jails. Um, I am curious about that too, though. Yeah. Um, I know because everyone, I mean, mm, I feel like nobody goes straight to prison. I think most people start in like jail programs. And I know my sister, for example, she had access to some programs while in certain jails. And these jails had like gardens and cats and really cool stuff. And then when she was sentenced and ended up at a more permanent facility, just a completely different vibe, which I guess that makes sense. We look at the statistics, we see the different services, different staffing as well. I do have data on the prison level staffs. So maybe that could play into it. Maybe places with fewer staff. I don't even know if there's still people here. Feel like I'm rambling to an empty room. Data on children of incarcerated parents being one of the factors driving motivation for education and vocational training. Yes. Yeah, it really is. And I mean, I heard a story in another presentation earlier about just how motivating it is for children to see people continue to pursue education and all of that behind bars because there's such a stigma about people being in jail or and oh the um and so I'm raising my sister's two kids and she's doing her time right now and it's it's a hard thing to figure out how to talk about because of that stigma on being associated with incarcerated people. But one of the things that was proposed was having vocational teachers teach at night after their regular job. Yes. Coordinate with the adult GED programs in the county jail. We have over 290 IPs on our school's waiting list. Yes. But I have only two full-time teachers, which can only instruct 60 to 80 students at a time. Yes. I see, and these are the problems. And how do we fix them? Oh man. And I wonder about like the what do you it's like a full circle type of connection between like helping students um like while they're incarcerated to get their education and then potentially be released and possibly come back and serving as instructors in different facilities, maybe. But I don't know if administrators would get behind that because of records and all of that. Um, but to me, I mean, they have the best experience of what would work in that context and how to connect with the environment. I don't know. I'm so happy we're thinking of solutions. Yes. And this idea of vocational teachers teaching at night after their regular job, like my entire PhD is nighttime classes. It's 4:30 to 7, for almost everything that we're doing. Had some ex-felons come back for motivational teaching. Yes. Yes. I love that. I listened to this TED Talk about his name was Curtis, and then his middle name was like in quotes Wall Street. But talking about how, and he did some motivational speaking and went back and developed a field program for developing financial literacy that looked at like emotional connections to that as well as things. But it's it's excellent. And I feel like that's such a great, like I know my sister, she and I have talked about it a lot in terms of trying to come out of this on the other side and, be able to advocate for people who go through, hard times early on and try to help get them ideally before. That's what she's maybe going to work on is try to get them before they end up incarcerated. And then I'm on this side of trying to advocate for education while incarcerated. Program somewhere, I don't remember where, that is training their alumni to gain AE instructor certifications to help with the lack of AE. Yes. I love this. And we need more of it. And so I'm so glad that places are doing this and that we're able to have a place to share this information with each other. I guess I get so in my head about where and how to push this information out and about and in the world to really like make differences. And it seems like policymakers are the way to go, but I'm a science girly. Um, okay. I might look into that one program that Annie had mentioned and see. So AE instructors with certificates. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all so much. I had a great time. I appreciate you all for joining and hanging in here.